Ontario election 2018 is in the books. Historic in many ways. Doug Ford becomes the third rookie leader in the last half-century to win power. The governing Liberals demoted to become the third-place party without recognized status. And the third time that the NDP becomes the official opposition. And the very first Green MPP elected in the province's history. Let's debrief with Robert Fisher, for half a century, a provincial affairs and analyst and journalist extraordinaire. You always love that intro, don't you? Come on, come on. You deserve it. Let's go. Erin Kelly, the CEO of Advanced Symbolics, Inc. Brittany, Andrew-Amofa, senior policy and research analyst at the Broadbent Institute. And our friend Michael Taube is back, the columnist for Troy Media and the Washington Times. And I think just to get this party started and get you in a frame of mind to opine on all things provincial, why don't we play a bit of tape from last night, shall we? Sheldon, go.
Thank you, everybody.
Hazel. Thank you.
Okay.
Wow.
This is very irregular, I gotta say.
That's an incredible welcome. I thank you. And
what are we supposed to do here?
Hazel,
Protocol says you let the outgoing premier speak first before the winner speaks.
Thank you from the bottom of my heart. I will never forget the trust you put in me. My friends, this victory belongs to you. People from every walk of life, from every corner of this great province, people from every political stripe, you have come together around one common vision of Ontario. You have sent a clear message, a message of hope and prosperity, a vision for the people of this province, a vision of a government that works for the people. My friends, a government that respects you, a government with integrity, a government that will always put you first.
Here's what the numbers said last night, in case you didn't stay up to the wee small hours of the morning to see it all finish. The Progressive Conservatives won 76 seats on their way to a majority government. They did it on the strength of a vote north of 40%. The New Democrats, the official opposition now, 40 seats. Based on just about a third of the vote. The Liberal Party, their worst drubbing ever, down to 7 seats, less than 20% of the total votes cast. And the Greens, they get that breakthrough. Mike Schreiner's seat in Guelph, 1 seat, less than 5% of the total vote. Voter turnout, incidentally, wasn't bad. 58% last night, which is up from the 2 previous elections, 58%. All right, Robert, get us started. What did the people of Ontario say last night?
Well, first let me say, coming out of the clip of Doug Ford, I hope that snafu over protocol is not a metaphor for what's ahead for the next 4 years.
You mean he and the outgoing premier talking at the same time?
You know, who jumped on whom and how did it happen? There's a lot of theories out there today. Look, we all know around this table, you better than most because you covered more campaign than anybody I know.
Except you.
Well, this campaign, not past campaigns. Thank you, though, Steve. I'll take that in a letter. It was about change. People wanted change. Everywhere I went in the province, I talked to people and they said, Kathleen Wynne has got to go. I'm not ready to vote Andrea Horwath. I have reservations about Doug Ford, but he offers the change I'm looking for, and that's why he finds himself with a majority government.
Brittany, what did the people say last night?
Well, this was absolutely a change election, but what happened last night was a false majority that can only be produced under a first-past-the-post system. So we saw that a majority of Ontarians, about 58%, did not vote for this government. But we do now have a majority government under Doug Ford. So what I think this speaks about is the fact that we do have more progressive voters in this province that were looking for a sort of change, but did not get it under this first-past-the-post system.
No, but this is the system we've got.
This is a system we got, but we can also look at other systems and explore the possibilities of that and how do we get a system that more accurately represents the voters and what they're calling for in our province.
Michael, what did the people say last night?
Well, I know what I said, and obviously I was happy, but the people themselves, I mean, they wanted change. I agree with Robert. I'm not going to argue with Robert on that. I think we're all sort of unified on that. But irrespective of the electoral system, I think what it does actually say is that people were looking for something different. They had looked at 15 years of the Liberal government, and they found, for the most part, that it was ineffective, that our economy had struggled, and that even just up until the very, very end, they weren't happy with what they saw. So they wanted something different. They could have gone one of two ways. They could have gone with the NDP, which was obviously, in my view and in other conservatives' views, a more more left-leaning party that was sort of bordering on radical ideas with some people, and obviously had some good people running for it as well. Or they could pick a fiscal and social conservative alternative, which was obviously what the PCs were offering, combined with this whole Ford nation, this populist mentality, sort of putting together small C conservative ideas, populist values, and trying to come up with something new. And I think ultimately in the end, they were willing to take a chance with Doug Ford because they liked what they saw, they liked the way that he campaigned, and for the most part, he stayed on message and talked about issues that resonated with them. Whether you love him or hate him, he actually really stayed on point, and that was one of the biggest criticisms people had, not just of Ford, but of the Ford family in general.
What did the people say last night?
Polly said people in Ontario are worried. They're worried about taxes, they're worried about debt, they're worried about Donald Trump. And that is what was reflected last night. They weren't enmeshed in scandals, as much as the scandals kept coming through the campaign. People were saying, we're worried about our jobs, we're worried about the future, and we're going to pick the leader that we think is going to tackle those things. It doesn't matter whether we think he's a paragon of virtue or not. We want somebody who's going to fix what we think is wrong, and that's what we saw last night.
On the chance we have some people watching us now who don't know who Polly is, we remind them that that is your nickname for your artificial intelligence
That's her
analyst,
name.
I guess. Okay, analyst. That's how you do your polling with artificial AI.
Yep.
Yeah, and Polly, what did Polly want?
Polly want a party.
Polly want a party. Polly got it. Exactly. Here's what Donovan Vincent wrote in the Toronto Star about our incoming premier. Sheldon, you want to bring this graphic up? Doug Ford has polarized this province like few politicians before him. His opponents say he is unqualified and ill fit for office, that he bears troubling similarities to U.S. President Donald Trump. The self-styled populism, the anti-elitism, the unorthodox, unpolished, shoot-from-the-hip rhetoric. His supporters view him as a charismatic leader, full of energy and folksy charm, someone whose sharp political instincts and lack of pretension make him an ideal fit to become the province's next premier. This seems a good launching pad for our next area of interrogation, which is the premier, the incoming premier. Michael gave a very magnanimous speech last night. He thanked Kathleen Wynne, he thanked Andrew-Amofa for the strong campaigns he ran. When people booed in the room, he didn't join it, he shut them down.
Yeah.
How does he become the premier, not just for the 40% of the people that voted for him, but for everybody?
Well, I mean, the obvious things are through hard work and whatnot, but I think that there's going to be something that people are going to catch. And if I can use a personal anecdote, I met the Fords many years ago when I worked in the Ontario legislature in the late 90s. I met Doug Ford and Rob Ford when they actually came in to visit occasionally their father, Doug Ford Sr. I saw a very different Doug Ford than we saw during the circus between 2010 to 2014 in Toronto. I saw a Doug Ford who actually was a kind person. He had obviously his opinions, his own way of thinking, but he was willing to listen to people. And I think that's going to be one of the keys to success here. If he learns and continues to do what he's done for the last little while, which is accept the fact that there's a lot of smart, talented advisors with him who have a lot more political experience than he does in federal and provincial politics, and he's able to continue to listen to their expert advice and implement those ideas, along with obviously his populist nature and the things that he wants to see out of Ontario. That could be a combination that I don't think a lot of people would have naturally expected from Doug Ford, and I think it could potentially surprise a lot of people too.
Brittany, I want to find out how Doug Ford becomes your premier.
I will have to disagree with that. There is going to be a burst of activism and organizing that's going to happen in Toronto, but also I think across the province when it comes to progressives who are looking for the type of changes that this province desperately, desperately needs. There needs to be investments in transit, huge investments in healthcare. In what way? We have not seen a plan, a fully costed, number one, but even a full comprehensive plan.
He said $5 billion for subways.
$5 billion, but can we have some more numbers there? Where are these subways going to go? Is subways even the best route that we should go down? How are subways going to help enhance the GTA area? So none of these things have were discussed at great lengths during this election at all. So the investments, the type of progressive investments that need to happen across this province is at stake here. And it's actually very scary times. And I don't think that he will be a premier for everybody. I think he will definitely implement quite a conservative, regressive agenda. And I think a lot of people are at risk here. The marginalized individuals, low-income individuals, and people who have, again, not have received the benefits of government. He might be populist, but he's a conservative populist.
Well,
and we have to remember that.
A lot of the low-income people and racialized minorities that you're talking about, Robert, they're part of Ford Nation. A lot of them are anyway.
I'm going to push back against
well,
that.
a lot of them are.
I want to hear about your, but you know, if you take a look at the results in Mississauga, and those communities there, you know, the new Canadians, the socially, fiscally conservative new Canadians, shall we say, people who are here generally, I think Delbruck says 5 years, and they become socially and physically conservative. I mean, these people voted for him.
They voted Tory.
Absolutely,
Correct.
absolutely.
But
so I think that there's going to be some issues. I think, you know, surrounding himself with good people, taking advice. You know, I think any good leader, you and I have seen at Queen's Park, any leader who's been successful has been surrounded by good, solid people who are prepared to tell the leader, no, we can't go that route.
Exactly.
And I think if you take a look at the campaign, Mr. Ford clearly listened to some of the really exceptional people that worked for him, and look at the result.
Erin.
Well, I think Doug Ford is going to be judged by the results that he gets, and that's got to be improvement in people's day-to-day lives. I think people knew what they were getting when they voted for Doug Ford. There were no surprises here. The Ford family is not just known in Toronto; they're known nationally. They're known internationally.
The Holiday Inn of Premiers, you know what you're getting.
Well,
Yes.
exactly.
No surprises.
And we saw that people they know what they were voting for. So at the end of the day, I think he's going to be judged on those results. And just as a little aside, we did do tracking on racialized communities. We didn't find any pattern of people of certain races voting according to leaders. It was really across the board for every leader.
Yes, and if we took a look at Brampton had their 3 seats that went New Democrat, right? That was what PC territory, if some would predict, due to ethnic voters. Social conservatives exist across the race, across all races. And I think if we take a look and actually have a conversation around adding more complex and nuanced conversations around racialized voters and how they tend to vote, I think we should really look at geography and the actual use of land in the area where people vote. And if we look at suburban areas tend to be PC for a number of different reasons, right? Whether that may be a car-centric culture, whether it may be high use of home ownership, whether there may not be as much low-income voters there. So we need to take away this narrative around racialized voters are delivering this PC vote. I think it's far more complex than that.
Well, I mean, saying that.
Mike,
no,
Yeah, I mean, I was going to basically just say you also have to look at the history of Ford Nation. And even if you disregard it as a movement, and I typically do as well, it actually cut across the spectrum. It cut across races, religions, gender. That was Rob Ford, the late Rob Ford's great appeal, is that he could appeal to everyone. Doug Ford is obviously his own man. He's a different person, and he's a different politician, as we've obviously seen now for the past few months. But he's going to actually follow that model because he knows in the end that his late younger brother, with retail politics, which has been the family's key, understands that they can break through into naturally non-conservative communities by actually proposing ideas and issues, sort of like Erin was discussing, about taxes, government, and things that drive people nuts. And that's what's going to work.
But you know, I think the key thing Mr. Ford is going to have to do, and it may be after he gets a look at the books, he's going to have to dampen some of the enthusiasm for a lot that he talked about.
Yeah.
You have to bring some reality. And I can hear him saying, look, folks, I got to look at the books, and they're worse than we thought. So I can only do this, I can only do that. And, you know, I think, Steve, that by and large, people out there, perhaps not the progressive community, but the people that voted for him are prepared to accept that for a period of time. They won't be able to do everything that he promised.
Let me follow up on that with you. I wonder if your approach today, I'm just asking you to speak for yourself, not for anybody else or any, you know, are you prepared to give this guy a chance, or do you see job one right now as defeating him?
I see job one right now as amplifying the need for progressive movement within our province and also discussing what will potentially be at stake. So this search for efficiencies is a very scary search. Where are we going to be cutting from? Where are the efficiencies going to be coming from? And I think that deserves interrogation, and it hasn't been interrogated enough. When we talk about efficiencies, are we talking about social services? Are we talking about the money that is being given to our shelter system?
Okay, but you do know he's got a pharmacare plan. It might not be as good as the other two parties. parties, but he's got something. He's got a child care plan. You may not like it as much as the other two parties, but he's got one. He's got a mental health spending plan as well. He's got a transit plan. I mean, that's all there. It may not be, you know,
As in-depth as it probably should be.
or might be, but he's got something to say about these things. Does that help you at all?
No, because his party has been focused on talking about efficiencies and talking about cleaning up what's happening at Queen's Park. Yes, wind has gone wrong in maybe several different areas when it comes to hydro, when it came to other, a number of different issues. But there are a lot of progressive gains that need to continue to be made and that need to be built upon from when wind had left. So I think that's at risk here. And if we're focusing solely on his search for efficiencies, then I don't know how true those statements are.
I want to know what Polly had to say about that. I don't know whether you discovered in any of Polly's tracking over the last month. You know, Doug Ford used that expression often. We're going to drive efficiencies. We're not laying anybody off. We're not firing anybody. We're not cutting. We're driving efficiencies. What did Polly find about that?
People were worried about that. We saw a lot of talk about, if there was one thing that dogged Doug Ford during this election, it was that platform. Where's the money coming from? Where are these efficiencies coming from? People know it's not all coming from the $6 million man. So, you know, we need to get away from the rhetoric now. Now that he's premier, there does need to be a solid way forward. People are looking for that.
And
Absolutely.
last night, I think, was the best night he's going to have as premier. The next one will be the day he leaves.
Inevitably.
Because there's going to be some very, very tough decisions ahead for this government. And you raised the point about efficiencies. I mean, this movie has been seen in Ontario before under Mike Harris. And ask the Liberals who came into power afterwards how long it took to turn the healthcare system around. It's still not fixed. Education was a mess after Mr. Harris. So where is Mr. Ford going to make these commitments to change? People are going to find there's going to be a different Ontario here. And I think that the tone of those changes, where he makes those cuts, will very much determine, I think, ultimately the success or failure of this first government.
I want to talk a bit about polling now. We were inundated by polls, some of them good, some of them pretty lousy, during the course of the last 31 days or so. And I want to, I'm actually going to force you to listen to what everybody else has to say first, and then you get to comment on everybody else. But Michael, do you have any sense about whether or not people's voting patterns were determined by being told basically every day of this campaign, PCs are going to win, they're in the lead, the NDP's in the lead, the NDP's at 47, the NDP's, you know, okay, all of the above.
There's a low information group that is always informed by that. We know that, and historically we've seen patterns. I think people are getting very frustrated, and with all due deference to people I like in the polling industry, the John Wright, Darrell Bricker, and others, they make mistakes. And for that reason, I think it frustrates a lot of people, and they start wondering, well, can I really trust the polling firms? Like, for example, when we were talking about behind the scenes, when some polls, like Forum, show that the NDP had grown all the way to 10, 11% of a lead after there was basically a two-horse race.
Forum had the NDP at 47% one day.
Which basically had people saying, well, is this legitimate? How could this have climbed so quickly?
Well, it didn't.
Exactly, and it didn't, and they actually retrenched pretty quickly. I think those little things frustrate people, and they basically try to use polls as sort of interesting guides. This is where things are at. But when it comes down to it, the nitty-gritty, I think they're just happy to sort of say, what matters to me? It's NIMBY. What's in, you know, and I think that's what they look at.
This is a very important question from this election and all elections. And I think it's incumbent upon the media. You know, I noticed you, Steve, for example, I don't want to unduly compliment you, but I think it's worth pointing out that every time you do a poll, you talk about the margin of error. You talk the 19 times out of 20.
I don't think I tweeted one poll the whole campaign.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to contribute to all of that.
My concern has always been, you know, the poll that has a small sample. So what does it really mean to say that, you know, such and such a party is in first place in southwestern Ontario when, 12 people may have been polled? Is that really a sense of what's going on there? So people need to know that small samples, there's got to be a question mark about these polls. And that's where the media responsibility comes on. You know, you've got to be able, if you're going to do it, you're going to report it, you'd better darn well explain it to people, because you don't want people being influenced by the poll that could be an outlier, the 47% for the NDP. I mean, they were rushing inhalators into the NDP campaign headquarters because they thought, oh my goodness, we're going to Nirvana in this election.
That's the problem. People are heavily influenced by these polls. I think polls serve a very interesting purpose in elections. I think for those who are heavily invested in the strategy purpose or the strategy side of things, they gain a lot from that. There's information that can be gained. They can decipher between the margin of error. They can decipher between, maybe this is not working as well as much. But for the average voter, it's quite disruptive. And it changes your thought process, or it changes how you think about the election. It changes how you react to the leaders. It changes how you react to policies. And if you saw right when the polls saw the NDP surging in support, everybody turned their attention on the NDP, right? All parties deserve scrutiny during election, but would that have occurred if the polls did not say that there was a rise in the popularity? And then if it didn't occur, what would have happened thereafter? Would they just have gone and crept and maybe have won this election? Who knows? That's still a probably far-fetched idea to many people. But I'm just saying it changes the direction and course of elections. And I'm wondering, what would it be like to be in a poll-free election where people are able to decide or cast their vote based on how they think?
Well, she'd be out of work. That's the first thing. So I don't
Polly would be out of work. I'd be fine.
Polly would be protesting on that.
That's right. Don't protest, Polly.
Having heard, no disrespect intended, but having heard from three amateurs on this, I'd like to hear now from somebody
Oh, thanks a lot.
for whom public opinion is
A living.
a passion, and all of the above. What do you make of it all?
Well, there's no doubt that polling affected the outcome of this election. I mean, Kathleen Wynne threw in the towel based on polls. I mean, that alone affected the election. And we had Polly reading the polls and looking at how these polls were affecting the election. So we know for sure that the polls affect the election. So I think what's really important, to touch on what Robert said, is I saw so many polls being published without margin of error. I mean, that is just completely irresponsible. It tells you right away the methodology was not sound.
But that's media, right? Media deserve to be castigated for publishing polls without any responsibility.
We need to have some
The good ones
standards.
did not. They all did it.
Right.
They all had margin of error.
Yeah, we need to have standards. We need to know the sample size. We need to know the methodology. A web panel. So there's different kinds. There's web panels. There's IVR. There's phone polling. There's AI polling.
Right.
What methodologies are they using? Is it a randomized controlled sample, or is it self-selected? When it's self-selected, it's very, very biased. That's why you cannot calculate a margin of error on a web panel, because people are self-selecting to be part of your panel.
Tell me this, what did Polly learn as a result of all of the numbers and all of the 200,000 people it was surveying over the course of the last 30 days?
People do strategic voting.
They do, eh?
Yes. I mean, you saw we were not going, Kathleen Wynne's surge last night, we definitely can say that was because she asked people, come up with a strategy of voting for a minority government. Now, she didn't get there. She did the best she could. I mean, Polly had her at most getting 5 and she got 7. So I think she did the best that she could with that strategy. The NDP didn't do the best that they could. They left a lot of seats on the table. But people do strategic voting. So
How do they know how to strategically vote?
They're looking at the polls and they're trying to judge. If Kathleen Wynne says maybe I should vote for the Liberals because she's definitely not going to be the leader, and people took that as, and she's going to step down, and so I don't have to worry that she's going to be the premier even if she does become. So people started to think, okay, yeah, I can cast my vote for the Liberals, and we saw a little search for them in that last week.
Look at Ottawa South. Excuse me. Look at Ottawa South with John Fraser, who changed his media campaign with these signs about stop Doug
In
Ford.
yellow.
Vote.
Unbelievable.
And
yeah.
this was a man who was on the endangered species list at party headquarters, right? He was gone. He was looking for a new job today.
For sure.
And yet I think the strategic voting there, he sent a message out and people got it, that he, in fact, would be one of those people that could not ultimately stop Doug Ford, but could make a difference. And it was the sign change, I think, that saved that campaign.
But this is also a product of our first past the post system, right? And where people don't feel their vote counts if it's not going to the winning party. So this is where strategic voting comes into play. But also with Wynne conceding, I thought it was very interesting because when I first saw or heard the announcement, I'm like, how does this really help the Liberals? Anybody who's been following this campaign or even Ontario politics for the last year knows the Liberals were on the decline. And Wynne, yes, is a huge factor, but overall, the way the Liberals have been doing politics, people weren't necessarily too happy with that. So we knew this was going to be a change election. But then when I heard that she conceded, and then I really saw how it impacted actually the NDP vote and how it potentially in how it did suppress the NDP vote, actually. So I think in some places, but
Not
a lot of
others.
core Liberal voters stay put. They got the swing Liberal voters, and maybe some of the
They got those undecideds.
Yes.
It was high undecided in this election, and she got those undecideds to think, okay, I can safely park my vote there and not have to worry the Liberals are going to somehow win it. It was a parked vote. She got
But
that
it's
parked
interesting,
vote.
Erin, I think that only worked where it was Liberal-Tory fights. Where it was Liberal-New Democrat fights, like in the downtown of this city, the Liberals lost them all.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Well, in Scarborough, East Scarborough, where it was a PC NDP battleground, and some of the NDP seats lost by maybe just 1,000 votes, or there were close races.
Yeah.
I think some of those Liberal votes that maybe would have went to the New Democrats stay put.
But we saw Toronto Centre, leave the Liberals after she conceded defeat.
Right.
So which was interesting. She lost the places where she was strongest, and she stole from the NDP.
The Liberals won that seat by 20,000 votes 4 years ago, and they were slaughtered.
And they were leading through the whole campaign, and then in the last week, boom.
Let's talk about that just a little bit more, and we want to play a little clip here. This is earlier this week. We had Tim Murphy, the co-chair of the Liberal campaign, in this studio, and we talked about this strategy of Kathleen Wynne's from last Saturday morning, where she announced, in effect, she was throwing in the towel, freeing people up to, as she put it, put a few Liberals in there and keep the other guys honest. Sheldon, let's roll that clip. Paul Rhodes, who tweeted on the weekend, he worked for Mike Harris when he was Premier of Ontario. I've worked for leaders who lost. Each one campaigned with dignity and honor until the last day. Ontario Liberals should be ashamed. What would you say to Paul Rhodes?
Well, I really, as I said, appreciate advice from an active Conservative partisan on how best to run a Liberal campaign.
But here's an active Liberal partisan who's giving the same advice.
Well, I guess we disagree. So we've got fundamentally, as I've said from the beginning, the responsibility of the leader of the party is to elect as many MPs in a federal case or MPPs in a provincial case as is possible. So you have an environment where you say, what are the things strategically and tactically you can do to achieve that outcome?
It's not that we're in unprecedented waters here. The Liberal Party has been here before, but it was almost 60 years ago that they were reduced at that time to 8 seats.
51, right?
1951, quite correct. That's right. So the Liberals find themselves having to rebuild from a debacle, the likes of which they haven't seen in, whatever it is, 58 years. Robert, what's it going to take to rebuild this party? And can it be rebuilt?
Oh, I mean, you never say never, right? I mean, I learned that a long time ago at Queen's Park, because you've seen a lot of situations where, well, it must be over and done with, and and it changes. I was looking the other night at some governments that have come out of the ashes. In British Columbia, the Campbell government, it took 15 years almost for them to come back. And I've talked to Liberals as recently as this morning who were suggesting 12, 13, 14 years for this party to come back. And I think that is going to be the big impediment to finding someone who's prepared to lead this party out of the wilderness. The commitment of time, Mr. Ford did this extraordinary thing in 3 months, but we're talking about many, many, many months of traveling the province, rebuilding the credibility of the Liberal Party. That's going to be the difficult task. Who's prepared to take that on? I take Mr. Murphy's 5-iron shot at Paul Rhodes there, and I sort of thought the same thing when I saw the tweet. Mike Harris never gave up, but he went through some pretty darn tough times. I mean, in that first election, his bus was called the bus from hell because they were going nowhere, right?
I'd hope you'd forgot about that, Robert. But yes, that's right. It's true.
But he came back. So yes, there's going to be another day, and I think it might take somebody outside of the telephone booth caucus that's been left on this election, to take somebody new and different and they haven't heard about before. Somewhere there has to be a kind of provincial Justin Trudeau to come out of nowhere and rebuild the party.
And that's the key, if I can juxtapose. That's what the same thing was they were saying after the 2011 federal election, if you remember. The Liberal Party is dead. That is it. They are moribund. 34 seats. Ha! Next time they'll be down to 10. Yeah. It didn't happen. They recovered in 4 years, and they formed the federal government as of right now, because you can never take out, especially with major parties like the Liberals and the Tories and the NDP as well, you can't take them out of the running. If she is able to, Kathleen Wynne has stepped down, if they're able to actually find someone young who's able to take over, either as a caretaker position or someone who can move the party along over the next few years, and sort of rebuild things, depending on how the NDP does, of course, in opposition, that would be the key to bringing it back. So to say that the Liberals are gone forever, My friend Tim Murphy can be happy to say that this one Conservative says, no, I don't think they're gone. I think they come back.
Erin?
I think the memories are going to be long on this government. Unlike the federal government in 2011, Michael Ignatieff, they hadn't screwed up. That is the problem with it. This is going to be like a Bob Rae. The NDP are still laboring under the Bob Rae government. It still comes up, and I think this is going to be a similar situation. I'd never say never. Of course, they can rebuild. Did the Conservatives rebuild after the Kim Campbell and the Brian Mulroney years? No, they went down to 2, and they had to combine with the Canadian Alliance to come back, right? They never really did come back.
Can I pick up on that? That's a fascinating point, and I want to put it to you, because you're with the Broadbent Institute, which basically represents progressive voters in the country. Numerous times over the past 50, 60 years, there have been occasional entreaties to merge the Liberal and New Democratic parties of Ontario, and it's never happened because obviously there's just too much opposition to it. But this presents another opportunity to consider that. Do you think there is any appetite for that out there?
I think there's an appetite from the public. I don't necessarily think that the two parties would necessarily be in line in terms of the policies that they want to enact. Like, for example, Andrew Horwath had said that if Wynne is willing to raise corporate taxes, then maybe there'll be a conversation. Are the Liberals willing to do that, considering who their base is? I don't know, right? So I think I don't necessarily think a coalition of some sort would be in the future for those two parties, but it's an interesting question.
These two parties in this election, I mean, the amount of disagreement among them was very, very slim. Maybe on back-to-work legislation, maybe on privatizing Hydro One, but on almost everything else, the Venn diagrams were practically synonymous, right?
Yep, absolutely.
So, is there an opening here?
I think I agree that the public may think that's a good idea, but I think the animosity that is long-standing, federally and provincially in this country, the animosity between Liberals and the Democrats and Liberals, I mean, as much as it may help the revival of the Liberal Party or a coalition-type government party, I don't see it happening.
But I don't think it's even animosity. I think it is a difference in beliefs and approach to politics, right? And I think one of the things the Liberals tried to do in this election was paint the NDP as these ideologues and these people who are too rigid in their beliefs. And it's more, there's an actual difference in between the way these two parties operate and how they want to do their politics and the policies that they deeply believe in.
Although the fact is, the Conservatives and the NDP are more ideologues. We don't sit on the fence very much. We have strong positions and we take them, which is why, if I don't mind you mentioning, I actually wrote years ago that I think it's easier for the political right to unite than the left because the political right usually comes from the same family. There are very few right-wing parties that actually move up the corporate ladder so much and actually move into a position where they can form government. Ergo, for example, as you mentioned, when the Canadian Alliance and the federal PCs merged back together in 2003, that's because we were actually there at one point. It all started breaking apart in 1987 when the Reform Party came along. It is much simpler for us to do it the same way in Alberta, where the United Conservative Party was part of two factions that existed together. So I agree with Brittany. The Liberals and the NDP may talk about it. It may be an interesting topic of conversation. It might be fun for the Broadbent Institute to look at. But the chances of it happening are next to nil because I think they both have their own set of visions and their own set of policies.
Talk to federal Liberals about Bob Rae.
Yeah, well, there you go.
There you go.
And the distrust that he felt from Liberals when he became interim leader.
That's right.
People were still, well, he's really a New Democrat, right?
It's a bridge too far in some cases.
I mean, and the people that abandoned him on both sides of the equation. So that's why I think it may make sense sort of academically, but in practicalities, no.
I don't see it.
Friends, that's our time. I want to thank everybody for coming in tonight. I apologize that it's only water on the table, but next time...
Wine?
It'll be... No, are you kidding? This is Doug Ford's Ontario. It's a buck of beer. It's a buck of beer next time. Thanks to Paulie's mom, Erin Kelly, the CEO for Advanced Symbolics, Inc., and Michael Taube, Troy Media, Washington Times, Robert Fisher, the political journalist, Brittany Andrew-Amofa from the Broadbent Institute. Great to have you all on TVO.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.